Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. So last weekend we had the reveal of the upcoming Horus Heresy Saga book series coming out soon, which is a re-release of Horus Heresy series novels focused on the major events of the heresy. The aim of this, aside from giving long-time fans another opportunity to buy some of their favourite novels, is to help newer fans to step into the wide-ranging universe that is the heresy. Even though the Horus Heresy book series is numbered in order, it can still be a little daunting for newer fans on where to begin and where to go. When you've got a book series that spans over 20 years, that's no surprise. And so the saga, highlighting maybe a few novels in particular, can maybe help that. Now, I broke down the novels and gave my thoughts and opinions on the titles selected on Monday, having a few surprises at a couple selected and a few that are omitted. However, today I wanted to do a video giving some pointers on where in the Heresy series you can go after reading the saga. What novels, in my opinion, are the best or most logical stories to move on to as you journey into the wider Heresy series. So, let's begin with a refresh on the Heresy novels that are going to be included in the Horus Heresy Saga. We have Horus Rising, False Gods, Galaxy in Flames, The Flight of the Eisenstein, Fulgrim, The First Heretic, Prospero Burns, Know No Fear, Betrayer, Praetorian of Dawn, The Master of Mankind, and Slaves to Darkness. Now, these all have been selected to cover the big events of the heresy, like I said, like bullet points if you will. So in theory, this could lead you straight on to the Siege of Terror series of novels, getting you up to speed with what happens in the heresy so you can just jump into its grand epic ending. And while you wouldn't get all the wide-ranging understanding of everything that's transpired in the heresy, missing some Primarch and Legion storylines, such as how Jagatai Khan, the Angel and Vulcan arrived at the Throne World, it's definitely enough to still enjoy the Siege of Terror. And there's nothing preventing you from going back and reading other stories after finishing the Siege. You can enjoy the lore however you want. That's the great thing about it, so do it the way that feels best for you. However, if you are new, and you really want to enjoy the Horus Heresy to its fullest, I personally would definitely recommend reading more of the Heresy series before going on to the Siege of Terror, because everything ties up there. It pulls together all its vast cast and characters. It all builds to that single battle and moment to end it all. And so you want to appreciate it to its fullest, because it is pretty magical when you get there. Now, this Heresy Saga collection does jump through the whole Heresy timeline, so I'm going to break it down into relevant sections here with areas you could go next depending on what novels you'd like to go from. And a couple of FYIs before we begin. First, I'm sticking to novels here. There are countless short stories out there for the Horus Heresy, and some of them are absolutely fantastic, and ones that I definitely recommend. But I want to keep these recommendations as simple and easy to understand as possible. And secondly, a lot of Heresy storylines overlap, so you may see certain novels appear more than once. However, with that out the way, the first group of novels for the saga, Horus Rising, False Gods, Galaxy in Flames, The Flight of the Eisenstein, Fulgrim, even The First Heretic a bit, all cover the opening events of the heresy, Horus's fall and the opening salvos of betrayal at Istvan. And it really lays open the whole heresy for you. One option from these earlier ones is that if you enjoy the character of Horus himself, you could continue more of his journey which would be mainly the novels Vengeful Spirit and Wolfsbane, which would actually take you into the final installment of the saga Slaves to Darkness very well, giving you a much better understanding of the traitor Warmaster. Vengeful Spirit covers Horus's discovering of how the Emperor manipulated the Primarch's memories, hiding a portal into the warp upon the world of Malek, whereupon Horus and his brother Mortarion journey for it, with Horus entering into the warp to meet the Pantheon of Chaos themselves, receiving their full blessing, the power to rival his father. And then the novel Wolfsbane sees the Space Wolf Primarch Leman Russ leave the throne world to fulfill his duty as the Emperor's executioner, going to face his fallen brother Horus himself. It's a pretty amazing encounter, and that's all I'll say, with Wolfsbane being one of my favourite novels of all time. And so reading these two really takes you into Slaves to Darkness perfectly for Horus, again giving you a much better understanding of the traitor Warmaster as you move into the Siege of Terror. Now, instead of following Horus's journey, you could instead follow either of the surviving loyalist Primarchs from Istvan instead, which would be Corax and Vulcan. Corax's journey is covered in the novels Deliverance Lost and Corax, and this covers everything from the Raven Lord returning to the throne world to speak with his father, receiving his blessing to rebuild his legion, and the disaster that becomes thanks to the sabotage by the Alpha Legion. Alternatively, Vulcan's story is continued in the novels Vulcan Lives, The Unremembered Empire, Deathfire, and Old Earth, covering everything from Vulcan's capture during Istvan, his torture at the hands of his brother Conrad Kurz, his escape, death, and rebirth, and then his final epic, arduous quest to reach the throne world and his father. They're both very good storylines, to be honest with you, and I definitely recommend them both, with Deliverance Lost and Old Earth being particularly great reads for each of them. And lastly, for that first selection of saga novels, you could follow the journey of Nathaniel Garrow, the Death Guard Marine who refuses to follow his Primarch and betray the Emperor, which transpires within the novel Flight of the Eisenstein. You can follow Garrow's journey in the novel Garrow, and then the Buried Dagger, before moving into the Siege of Terror. There are short stories and other audio dramas as well for Garrow, but like I said, I'm going to keep it simple and just stick to the novels here. However, moving on, next in the Horus Heresy Saga novels is Prospero Burns, the Space Wolves' first solo novel in the Heresy, and their version of events in the build to the burning of Prospero, a pretty major event of the Heresy. In my opinion, after this, you really need to read the burning of Prospero from Magnus and the Thousand Sons' point of view, which means the Heresy novel Thousand Sons. It begins the story of Magnus's fall in the Heresy, and it is quite simply an absolutely outstanding novel, covering everything from the past between Russ and Magnus, the worrying trend of Magnus's arrogance with sorcery, the Nicaea Decree, Magnus's ruining of the Emperor's Webway project, and then building all the way to that epic battle between Magnus and Russ upon Prospero. Again, quite simply, it's an absolutely epic novel, and one you really have to read. Which from there, if you enjoyed it, you can lead on to the Crimson King, followed by Fury of Magnus within the Siege of Terror. The Primarch storyline I personally think is the greatest in all the Heresy. Now, if Prospero Burns makes you a fan of Russ and the Space Wolves Legion, however, then I recommend moving on to the novel Scars, and ultimately Wolfsbane, which I mentioned earlier for Horus. This all tells the journey of the Wolf King's journey post-Prospero, reaching the throne world before departing to face the traitor Warmaster. And even though Scars is primarily a White Scars novel, you also get a great sighting of Prospero post its destruction at the hands of the wolves as well. So it all ties in pretty well. Back to the saga once again, we have Know No Fear and Betrayer, which lead perfectly onto the Imperium Secundus storyline of Unremembered Empire, Pharos, Angels of Caliban and Ruinstorm. This continues Rabute Guilliman's time during the Horus Heresy on the Eastern Fringe, showing what he, Lionel Johnson and Sanguinius were doing throughout the Heresy, and why only Sanguinius made it to the throne world in time, and not Guilliman and L. Johnson as well. It's quite essential reading if you want to understand Sanguinius's state of mind and character in the siege, as well as arguably Rabute Guilliman in the current 40k universe. And back to the saga again with Praetorian of Dawn and Master of Mankind. These two are really quite isolated looks at the throne world during the Heresy. There's not any one particularly great avenue to follow after these in my opinion. Particularly so as Rogel and the Throne World make a lot of little appearances in other Heresy novels throughout the series, so you generally get a feel of what's going on for him just by reading everything else. Mechanicum is quite an interesting read, showing Terra and the Throne World dealing with Mars's rebellion. So if you enjoy seeing events of the Throne World during the Heresy and Rogel, I'd definitely say giving that a read. And the ending of Old Earth is pretty great too, with Vulcan reaching the Throne World and reuniting with Rogel and then the Emperor. And it takes place after the events of Praetorian of Dawn and Master of Mankind as well. So though it's a Vulcan story, it ties in pretty well to those. However, lastly, from the saga, we have Slaves to Darkness. Honestly, that's the perfect launching point into the Siege of Terra itself. It basically has Horus rounding his brothers back up for the final assault. And so there's nothing that really needs reading from there apart from diving into the siege itself. And so that's it. They are all the most logical books and storylines to move on to from the saga in my opinion, based on the selection of books that are in it. A few avenues to go down depending on what ones you particularly enjoyed. There's plenty of other fantastic books out there in the Horus Heresy series that I haven't mentioned, so of course you can just pick whatever way you want to go. I've simply tried to suggest a few routes you can take here, based on the characters you have seen and followed in the saga. However, as always everyone, that's it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers for your support. It truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.